Springboks versus All Blacks pitch invader chaos. Some rugby moments are unforgettable for all the wrong reasons, and this one in 2002 still cries out loud from the history books. The Springboks were hosting the All Blacks in a Tri-Nations clash at Kings Park, and everything seemed set for a big, intense battle. But then, out of nowhere, chaos broke loose when a fan named Peter Van Zyl stormed onto the pitch in the middle of the game. Now, you'd expect pitch invaders to maybe wave a flag or try to hug a player, right? But not this guy. For some strange reason, he charged straight at referee Dave McHugh and took him down like it was a tackle drill. The hit was so hard that McHugh ended up dislocating his shoulder. Play stopped, as you would expect. The crowd roared in disbelief, and players from both teams ran in to protect the ref. Security eventually dragged Van Zyl off, but the damage was done. The referee left the field in the medical buggy, and it threw the whole match into disarray. South African fans were embarrassed, and the incident made international headlines, but it wasn't the kind of headline the rugby world needed. As for Van Zyl, well, he didn't just get a slap on the wrist, he was convicted of assault, fined, and banned from attending rugby games in South Africa for life. This was a punishment all rugby fans found refreshing. Pumas' epic comeback against Wallabies. In 2024, the Wallabies had their chests puffed out in Santa Fe, thinking they had things under control. And why not? After all, the Rugby Championship match against Argentina started like a dream for them. Within minutes, they were up 23 and looking sharp. But the thing about rugby is, a big early lead means nothing if you switch off. And boy, the Wallabies switched off in style. The Pumas slowly started clawing their way back in ways no one expected. First with some hard carries, then with tries that lit up the crowd. By halftime, it was still a fight, but in the second half, Argentina just exploded. They ran in 9 tries in total, with players like Mateo Carreras, Pablo Matera and Joaquin Oviedo running rings around the Aussies. All of a sudden, the Wallabies' defence was like a leaky bucket, and the Pumas kept pouring through. And by the end, the scoreboard read 67-27, which was not only Argentina's biggest win over Australia, but Australia's heaviest test defeat ever. The Wallabies had never conceded that many points before, and to make it worse, they had been the ones in control early on. The Pumas' comeback wasn't just chaotic, it was the biggest in Rugby Championship history as they flipped a 17-point deficit into a 40-point win. Bismarck du Plessis' unfair red card. In 2013 at Eden Park, South Africa faced New Zealand in what should have been a classic showdown. Instead, it turned into one of rugby's most infamous refereeing controversies. Early on, Bismarck du Plessis smashed Dan Carter with what looked like a perfect tackle. Carter got up fine, yet referee Romain Poit stunned everyone by showing du Plessis a yellow card. Fans in the stands, players on both benches, and even commentators were left speechless. The TMO offered Poit a chance to review, but he doubled down. When du Plessis returned in the second half, he was penalised again, this time for a fend on Liam Messam. Of course, 2 yellows meant red, leaving the Springboks a man short. New Zealand won 29-15, but the score was overshadowed by the chaos. Outrage exploded online, memes, Reddit threads, and angry tweets flooded in, with South Africans furious and even Kiwi fans admitting the call was absurd. The backlash grew so loud that World Rugby later admitted Poit had been wrong and that the Carter tackle was completely legal. That red card didn't just cost South Africa a match, it shifted momentum in the Rugby Championship, leaving du Plessis unfairly punished and Poit the most unpopular man in Johannesburg. Bakkies Botha headbutt mayhem. If you know Bakkies Botha, you know he was never the kind of player to back down from anything. But in 2010, he went a bit too far. It was South Africa against New Zealand in the Tri-Nations, and the game had barely started when the cameras caught Botha leaning into All Black scrum half Jimmy Cowan with a direct headbutt. There was no pushing or shoving, it was just a blatant crack right to the head. Cowan staggered, players from both sides charged in, and suddenly it looked more like a street fight than a rugby match. The referee and his assistants had their hands full trying to calm things down, but the replays left no doubt, and the citing commissioner didn't take long to hand Botha a 9-week ban. That meant missing the rest of the tournament, which was a huge blow for the Springboks. Of course, South African fans were split. Some said it was just Bakkies being the tough and uncompromising player the world knew him to be, while others admitted he crossed the line. The All Blacks, of course, were furious, and it just added another chapter to the fierce rivalry between the two teams. First Argentine win in Australia in 35 years. You'd think a 35-year drought would be broken in a joyous, peaceful way, but nope, this one ended in pure chaos. In 2018, Argentina finally beat the Wallabies in Australia for the first time since 1983. The Pumas played brilliantly that day, holding their nerve and sealing the historic win. But once the final whistle blew, things turned ugly. As players were walking around the field soaking in the moment, a group of fans started giving the Wallabies a mouthful. Most of the players ignored it, but flanker Lukan Tui ended up in a heated confrontation with one of them. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and suddenly there was a physical scuffle. Unfortunately, security was slow to react, which made the scene even messier. Footage of the incident went viral, with fans arguing over who was in the wrong. Some said the fan crossed the line by confronting a player after a tough loss, while others argued that players should just walk away no matter what's said to them. The fallout was rough on Tui. He announced soon after that he was stepping away from rugby for a while, partly because of the incident and the toll it took on him. Border breach chaos during COVID. You probably remember how strict things were during the peak of COVID. Rugby players had to live in these tight bubbles where every movement was monitored. No sneaking out, no side trips, nothing. But the Argentina squad in 2021 decided they'd bend the rules a little. 6 players, including their captain, plus 2 staff members, took what they thought would be a harmless day trip to Byron Bay. The idea was to hit a health retreat, relax, and maybe clear their heads before the weekend's big game. So what was the problem? Well, Byron Bay was in New South Wales and the team was based in Queensland. This meant they crossed the state border without permission, which was not allowed at the time. When they tried to come back that night, Queensland police were waiting. Their minibus was stopped and the players were told they couldn't enter, and that was that. Suddenly, 8 members of the Argentina squad were stranded outside the state. They were instantly ruled out of the next test match against Australia, and that sent the Pumas scrambling to reorganise their squad. This threw the match preparations into chaos. Media headlines exploded with the story. Some fans laughed, some were furious, and others just shook their heads, wondering how professional athletes thought they could get away with it. The Wallabies went on to win the game, but most of the talk that weekend wasn't about the game itself. It was about the Pumas' Byron Bay adventure gone wrong. Quade Cooper knee on Richie McCaw. If you followed rugby back in 2011, you know there was some serious heat between Quade Cooper and Richie McCaw. Every time Australia and New Zealand met, you could almost feel the tension before kickoff, and it all came to a boiling point in the Tri-Nations decider at Lang Park. The game was tight, the atmosphere was insane, and every contact between the two felt personal. Then came the moment. McCaw was on the ground, and Cooper came in over him, but instead of stepping past, his knee connected right with McCaw's head. The crowd couldn't believe it, the commentators lost it, and you could see McCaw's teammates instantly surround Cooper. Now, some people said it was accidental, while others swore it was deliberate, but the replays didn't help Cooper's case. You could see his knee making clear contact, and the slow motion only made it look worse. The All Blacks were fuming, and the Wallabies suddenly had a target on their backs for the rest of the match. From that point, the game had this edge that felt different. Every tackle had extra force, and every ruck was more heated. The knee incident became the talking point for weeks afterward, sparking endless debate in pubs, on TV panels, and across rugby forums. Cooper's reputation with New Zealand fans was already shaky, but after that, it hit rock bottom. Every time he touched the ball in future matches against the All Blacks, the boos rained down heavily. And while some moments fade with time, this one became part of the Cooper-McCaw rivalry folklore. Double red card mayhem. Rugby matches can get fiery, but it's rare to see 2 players sent off for almost the exact same thing in the same game. That's what happened at Suncorp Stadium in 2020 when the Wallabies took on the All Blacks in a Tri-Nations branded Rugby Championship clash. It all started when Ofa Tu'ungafosi flew into a tackle on Tom Wright. His shoulder made clear contact with Wright's head, and the referee didn't hesitate. Out came the red card, and suddenly the All Blacks were down to 14 players. The Wallabies crowd loved it as they sensed a big opportunity, but here's where it got bizarre. Only a few minutes later, Lachie Swinton, playing his debut for Australia, came charging into a hit on Sam Whitelock. Ironically, the tackle was almost identical in height and impact to Tu'ungafasi's. The referee took one look and produced another red card. And just like that, both teams were down to 14, and the match turned into a wide-open, chaotic scrap. Every player on the field knew one wrong move could make it even worse. So even though the tackles stayed heavy, you could see everyone hesitating just a split second more than usual. The double red card became the big story after the match. Analysts replayed both hits side by side, debating whether they were both worth red cards or if one should have been yellow. Either way, the game's flow was thrown into total disarray, and the chaos of that night still gets brought up whenever red card controversies are discussed in the Rugby Championship. Matthew Reynolds' time-wasting call fiasco. The The Wallabies were seconds away from beating the All Blacks in Melbourne in 2022. All they had to do was close out the game from a penalty deep in their own territory. Bernard Foley stood over the ball, ready to kick it into touch, but he took a little too long. He waited, looked around, adjusted, and waited again. That's when French referee Mathieu Reynal made one of the most talked about calls in recent rugby history. He blew the whistle and penalised Foley for time wasting. The Wallabies players looked stunned, the crowd dished out the boos, and the All Blacks could hardly believe their luck. Suddenly, instead of the game being over, New Zealand had a scrum 5 metres out from the Wallabies line. They made the most of it, scoring the winning try right at the death. The switch from almost certain victory to heartbreaking defeat happened in less than a minute. After the match, rugby fans around the world went wild on social media. Some said Reynal was right to enforce the laws, but others thought it was the worst call they had ever seen in a high-stakes test. Now, Foley defended himself, saying he couldn't hear the ref clearly over the noise, but how would we know if he's telling the truth? As for Reynal, he stood by his decision in interviews, saying he had warned Foley repeatedly. The whole thing became known as the time-wasting call and is still debated whenever refereeing decisions change the outcome of big games. For Wallabies fans, it's a moment they'll never forget, but for the All Blacks, it was one of the sweetest steals in their rivalry with Australia. Brutal contest, Springboks versus Pumas. This game wasn't rugby, it was a street fight wearing rugby jerseys. In 2023, the Springboks and Pumas went head-to-head and ended with a 22-21 scoreline, but the points were almost the least important thing. Right from the first whistle, you could feel it. Players weren't just making tackles, they were making statements. Every collision had that extra bit of nastiness, and it was similar to two mighty bulls bashing heads. There were headshots that made you wince. There were little off-the-ball shoulder bumps when the referee's back was turned. And if someone got tackled into touch, they stayed in touch an extra second or two with some extra pushing. Both teams seemed to take it personally. The Springboks wanted to show their physical dominance, and the Pumas, well, they've built a reputation for never backing down, and they weren't going to start here. By the end of the first half, tempers were boiling. You'd see players walking past each other and muttering something under their breath. There were also mini shoves after the whistle, and one ruck in particular turned into a shoving match that could have easily gotten worse. The final few minutes felt like survival mode for everyone. The Springboks clung to their narrow lead while Argentina kept coming, swinging big tackles and looking for one last break. Even when the whistle finally went, players were still jawing at each other. Media outlets didn't even bother sugarcoating it. They called it a brutal contest, plain and simple. It wasn't the cleanest rugby you'll ever see, but it was the kind of match you couldn't stop watching. Dean Grayling's forearm smash on McCaw. Dean Grayling probably didn't wake up that morning planning to make Rugby Championship history for the wrong reasons, but that's exactly what happened in 2012 in a match against the All Blacks. The Springbok prop saw Richie McCaw at the bottom of a ruck and for whatever reason decided to launch himself right over the pile. Next thing you know, his forearm came crashing down on McCaw's jaw. It was nasty, but McCaw, being McCaw, got up and kept playing. However, you could tell he was rattled. The replays made it look even worse, because this wasn't a normal rugby hit. It was late, it was high, and it was straight to the face. The referee didn't hesitate. Out came the card and Grayling's match was over. That left the Springboks down a man against one of the most dangerous sides in the world. The All Blacks took advantage, of course, and the Springboks' chances of winning all but vanished. After the match, Grayling faced the music. The disciplinary panel reviewed the footage and hit him with a suspension. Fans and pundits went back and forth about whether it was frustration, poor judgment, or just plain recklessness. Either way, it became one of those clips you still see in highlight reels about the game's wildest moments. It was brutal, no question, and it's the kind of thing that sticks in people's memory whenever Springbok versus All Black clashes are mentioned. Drunk pitch invader knockout. This particular incident in 2024 had nothing to do with the ball and everything to do with chaos. It was after the final whistle of a Springboks versus Pumas test at Mbombela Stadium when a drunk fan decided the night needed a little extra entertainment. He wasn't alone either. Several fans had jumped the fence, but this guy became the headline. Out of nowhere, the fan stumbled onto the pitch, waving his arms and making a scene. You could tell he wasn't exactly sprinting like a trained athlete, but security still had to act fast. The crowd went from cheering the win to roaring at the intruder. Some laughed, some booed, and a few even tried to egg him on. The man zigzagged for a bit, dodging one security guard and then two, but his luck was about to run out. One particularly determined guard hunted him down like a flanker, spotting a loose runner, and boom, hit him from behind with a proper rugby tackle. Face to turf, lights out, the stadium erupted. Half the people were laughing, the other half were stunned at how clean the tackle was. The fan wasn't exactly bouncing back up either. He was out cold for a moment before paramedics came in, checked him over, and helped get him off the field. The clip went viral almost instantly, and it wasn't just rugby fans watching it, it made the rounds on sports shows, news outlets, and even late-night TV segments. Some joked that the security guard deserved a spot in the Springboks defensive lineup. Others said it was a warning to anyone thinking of trying the same stunt. In the end, the celebrations and interviews carried on, but that knockout was what everyone remembered most. If you enjoyed this, there are plenty more rugby videos in the works. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching,